other words, it still has as its geometry personal destiny. But remember what I've told you about the 4-6, that the 4-6 is a voyeur in that sense. That their gift of being able to interact socially through their fourth line personality is so that they can watch from the unconscious platform of their sixth gate. And particularly the 4-6 is voyeuristic when it's in the interregnum between its Saturn return and the Chiron return, between 28 and 51 years of age. During this time, the sixth line is in that phase of its process where it's up on the roof being aloof. So what you have in the 4-6 is that you have this waiting through its relationships to take the opportunity to influence others. But while it's waiting for that opportunity, it's up there on the roof watching everything objectively. That's the way it plays out its life's theme. That's how its purpose gets to be played out. In other words, this is the opportunity to actually ultimately become a role model. Now think about what the sixth line teaches us. What the sixth line teaches all of us, whether it's in our profile, whether we have it in gate activations or not, is that the sixth line teaches us that all of us can become role models after our Chiron return. Something to think about. You know, the process of the sixth line is that it spends its first Saturn cycle, that 28 years plus, it spends its first Saturn cycle living out an essentially third line theme of trial and error. It goes from the end of that Saturn cycle to the time that it's around 50 years old, 51, the Chiron return, going up onto the roof, being aloof. But what we know, and I tease all of my fellow Chiron people right now, you know, every 30 seconds someone in America is turning 50. We got a whole generation of people that are entering into this Chiron phase. First time consciously ever we have a generation that's living this out. And we're going to be, as a result of that, the first generation since the body graph changed in the 1780s to a 9-centered system, that we went from the Saturn cycle to the Uranian cycle. It's the first time we're going to live out the modern life cycle. And that modern life cycle flowers after 50. In other words, all of us get the opportunity to be able to, as a potential, synthesize our life experience, integrate it, and then live it out. And live it out without being self-conscious. Live it out correct in the way in which we operate in the world. In other words, for all of us to become wise as to who it is we are, so that we can be living role models. Now obviously any sixth line being is going to carry that theme. So for them it's much more accentuated in their process. In other words, somebody like this, you have to see what a sixth line sexuality is going to look like. He was a famous playboy. You know, up until his Saturn return when he was 28, that sixth line unconscious was the one night stand, let's go for it, baby. And what he lived out was his third line trial and error, having relationships